Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Dissenter. I'm your host, Ricardo Lopes, and today I'm joined by Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman. He's a humanistic psychologist exploring the depths of human potential. He's interested in using his research to help all kinds of minds live a creative, fulfilling, and self-actualized life. He likes to share his enthusiasm of psychology through his teaching, writing, speaking, and podcast. He writes the column Beautiful Minds for Scientific American and hosts the Psychology Podcast, which has received over 10 million downloads. Dr. Kaufman's writing has appeared in The Atlantic, Psychology Today, and Harvard Business Review. Dr. Kaufman's books include the new one, Transcend, the new science of self-actualization, which was published just this month. Wired to Create, Unraveling the Mysteries of the Creative Mind, Ungifted, Intelligence Redefined, and as editor, Twice Exceptional, Supporting and Educating Bright and Creative Students with Learning Difficulties, and the Cambridge Handbook of Intelligence. So, Dr. Kaufman, thank you a lot for taking the time to come on the show. It's a pleasure to everyone.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Been wanting to chat with you for a while.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to talk today about your new book, Transcend, and there you focus on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I guess that you also sort of update it a little bit with new information, new research, and things like that. So let's start with the hierarchy of needs. So what was the original hierarchy, or at least some of its main points, let's start with that. Tell us a little bit about Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Well, there's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and then there's how it's been presented over the past 75 years in introductory psychology textbooks and in management textbooks. And the way it's been presented is usually as a pyramid, where you have physiological needs at the bottom, like food, water, things like food, water, shelter, and then you have the need for love and belonging, which is how Maslow phrased it. Above that, and like like a video game, so the like levels, and then the next level is connection, and then if you get, not, I'm sorry, not connection, but esteem, like esteem from others, the need for esteem and respect and pride. And then we just jump right up to self-actualization, and that's it.
Yes, but one interesting thing that I read in your book, and I really wasn't aware of that because I'm not really that well informed about transcendence from a psychological perspective and humanistic psychology and positive psychology and things like that. But it seems that people have been criticizing Maslow's pyramid or hierarchy of needs in ways that are not that fair, right? I mean, there are some unfair criticisms out there. Could you tell us about some of the more misleading ways that people tend to talk about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you actually look into Maslow's published writings, you realize, first of all, he never drew a pyramid. There was never any pyramid in any of his writings, and even his unpublished. I mean, I really did an exhaustive search of his writings. But you also realize that he made it quite clear that human development, he in a lot of ways he was he was a developmental psychologist at heart. Human development is a constant two-step forward, one-step back dynamic. We're constantly striving for growth, but then we fall flat on our ass. That's my language, not Maslow's language. And then we try to pick ourselves up and keep going again. And that's just part of being human. That's part of being to be fully human doesn't mean that you're somehow above being human. That it means that you've really embraced the totality of who we are, and you do try to transcend the sum of your parts. That's something we can get to. I think that's something the evolutionary psychology approach has left out of the picture in some important ways. But Maslow made it very clear that we're simultaneously not at maximum capacity in any of our needs. I mean, I could with you right now, and I'm not going to do it, but I could go through each of the needs, say, what percentage are you from 0 to 100% on your connection, on your esteem, your hunger? I guarantee you're not going to be 100% satiated in every single one of the things. So, he made that clear too. He made it clear that we can target multiple needs simultaneously. A lot of people have claimed that Maslow was an elitist because of the pyramid with self-actualization at the top for only a few people. Well, like I said, he never even drew a pyramid, first of all. Second of all, is it elitist to point out that some people, there's individual differences? It's an interesting question we can discuss as well. Is it elitist to point out that individual differences exist? and that's an interesting question. And then it's another, another thing is, equating individual differences with not having potential for growth is erroneous. People make lots of leaps, between certain things, and then that must be what they're saying. And Maslow, in my close reading, was he believed that we're all capable of self-actualization, but there are lots of things that get in the way. There are so many things that can go wrong with that process, and he was really interested in studying those blocks and those blocks of self-actualization. So I really do think he was misrepresented, misunderstood. I think that he was brilliant. I just enjoyed going through his writings and really reading about what he actually thought about self-actualization and ultimately transcendence towards the end of his life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so tell us what transcendence is really about from a modern psychological perspective.
Transcendence is it may sound like one of these Deepak Chopra kind of terms, something like, why is Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman, like talking about transcendence? And I think that in some ways I want scientists to reclaim the woo-woo. Never quite phrased it that way before, but there are some psychologists. I count myself as one of them, but I'm certainly not the only one. Dr. Keltner at Berkeley, David Yaden. Suddenly, I can't think of any other psychologists in the field, but there's plenty more of them. Even I would put Steven Pinker in here, and I would put, believe it or not, I'd put Pinker into this category. People who are interested in how the better angels of our nature is still part of our nature. Yeah. That our nature encompasses many things, many contradictory things, but let's not neglect that there are things that get us outside of ourselves. There are characteristics that we can have that reduce our self-focus. And we can, in a very simple way, think of transcendence as reducing our self-focus and having experiences that get us more connected to other humans. And I mean humankind. I don't mean the friend you have who you share the same ideology with. I mean, like what I really was pushing toward was a form of transcendence, which is about unitary, universal love and identification with common humanity, not identification solely, exclusively with the many other variables that humans have decided to conceptually divide us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. And it's interesting that you mentioned Steven Pinker, because he's also one of the most prominent figures in evolutionary psychology, for example. And you also mentioned earlier that evolutionary psychology, you think, left out things like transcendence, right, in its topics of study, let's say, or objects of study. So do you think that in any way there are some aspects of our evolved psychology that are associated with what we're talking about here?
Yes. Yes. If I said there weren't, then I'm pushing dualism. I'm pushing, like, there are implications, deep implications, if I really said no to that question.
Yeah,
about
I think I understand what you're saying. You're saying basically that if you said that there were no bits of transcendence that had any sort of
all.
evolved basis, then I mean it would be very hard to explain where it comes from, right?
All God, be all God. Yeah, but yeah, so I certainly do, and I consider myself an evolutionary psychologist. I mean, I consider myself a developmental psychologist. I consider myself a positive, well, maybe not positive psychologist, a humanistic psychologist.
Yeah.
But I really like to bring in multiple perspectives and see how they can be integrated. Maslow himself had a quote: "If everything looks like a hammer, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, you know?"
Sure.
And I think that some evolutionary psychologists get so deeply entrenched in their perspective that everything looks like mating to them, for instance, or, everything is explained by mating. So it doesn't matter what it is, even if it seems to, for instance, you know, I've argued that the human drive for exploration is a basic human need that cannot be reduced to one of the other needs that a lot of evolutionary psychologists have reduced it to in the past, like the mating motive and stuff. I mean, most 5-year-olds demonstrate the need for exploration before puberty. They're not interested in procuring mates at age 5. like, come on, not everything. And someone needs to say at some point, enough is enough. Like, can we broaden our perspective to all of what it means to be human? Now, and I say this with all due respect because I have deep respect for those independent research projects. But I think we all need to talk to each other more and get outside of our own silos in psychology and realize there are other perspectives on the table. Not everything needs to be reduced to aggression. I mean, that's what Freud did. I don't want the field of evolutionary psychology just to be Freud, in a different guise. Freud basically argued that everything could be reduced to the aggressive or the sexual instinct. And if you read some evolutionary psychology textbooks, you'd leave it thinking that's true. That's still true. That everything, well, it looks like altruism, but it's really you're trying to get laid. So, but I want to answer your question. So I think that absolutely a lot of the things that evolutionary psychologists have studied, and they have studied things like altruism. I mean, don't get me wrong. A lot of better angels of our nature have been studied from an evolutionary perspective, maybe not disproportionately so, but have been studied. And our human consciousness has built on all these things in unique ways that you don't see in other animals. See, what I'm really interested in, when I call myself a humanistic psychologist, that means I'm interested in what it means to be human.
Yeah.
And that means that certainly we can try to understand all the ways we have similarities with orangutans and turtles and bonobos, etc. But at the end of the day, we're not turtles.
Sure.
We're not orangutans, right? And I'm really interested in this uniquely evolved capacity or uniquely developed capacity for consciousness and our ability to create goals and the flexibility of goal pursuit and goal creation among humans is really incredible.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing that I found very interesting in your book is that you talk about humanistic psychology. I mean, I have to be honest here, but because I haven't read anything or hadn't read anything about humanistic psychology before reading your book, I was just somewhat aware of existential humanistic psychotherapy, but not humanistic psychology. So could you tell us what that is about?
What humanistic psychotherapy?
No, humanistic psychology.
Well, I think humanistic psychology is, at the end of the day, interested in what does the integrated whole human being look like, and our higher possibilities, our higher humanitarian, spiritual, and creative possibilities. I want to apologize to our viewers if the screen keeps going dark. For some reason, my computer is freaking out. The coronavirus. My, I'm blaming everything. I'm pulling a Larry David. I'm blaming everything on the coronavirus right now. So when people call me and I'm on the mood to talk to anyone, coronavirus.
Yeah,
So
but at
anyway,
least
yeah.
there's many of our problems now that are due to coronavirus. So.
So it's fair. It's a
Yeah,
fair. It's a fair blaming.
yeah.
Yes. So I want to apologize. The screen keeps going dark. It looks like my screen is going crazy. Oh, so annoying. Um, but so we're still gonna try to get through an entire straight train of thought without this happening. But
Yeah.
okay, so humanistic psychology really is interested in our higher possibilities, our higher spiritual, creative, humanitarian possibilities. What does it mean to live a vital life, to direct the life the way we want to? A lot of the humanistic psychologists talked about things such as freedom, responsibility, creativity, growth, health, social action. A lot of the words that were used and phrases that the humanistic psychologists used really resonated with me as a person, as a whole person, much more than any other subdiscipline in psychology right now. I felt like, even words like happiness, high performance, achievement, that psychologists use nowadays, had a different flavor than what the humanistic psychologists were interested in.
Right. And earlier, when you were talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I'm not going to call it a pyramid because, as you said,
That's right.
he never created a pyramid there. But is it the case that people? I mean, there are the several different levels, but do people really need to go through each level to get to the top? Or I mean, is it possible for some people to not even be able to fulfill some of the most basic needs but still be able to, for example, self-actualize and other things like that?
Yeah, I mean, life is not like a video game, right? It's not, you don't reach a certain level of needs and then some voice from above is like, "Congrats, you've unlocked connection," and then don't go up, and that's not really how life works, and it's up for us to decide how we want to live our lives. Some people, there's individual differences. I've made a point in this as well in our need thresholds.
Yeah.
I think there are basic needs that have evolved. There's evolutionary psychology needs uh, that have evolved through evolutionary psychology processes, but we also have individual differences in those needs. For instance, some people are much more interested in the need for connection than others.
Yeah.
Some people could care less, not could care less. They're happy with like one or two friends, and they're like, "I'm good. Like I'm gonna focus on something else now." Where there's others that they just love, 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 and you're like, shut up about the love already. Like, okay, we get it, love, but we want to do something else in our lives. So, so I'm also part, cheeky. I hope you knew what you were getting into when you invited.
Yeah, I was aware of that. Sometimes I
Yeah.
listen to your podcast, so
Oh,
yeah.
good, good. Some people call me the notorious SBK. Um, but but then there are those who are maybe obsessed with the need for esteem, self-esteem. So those people are equally annoying. they're like, respect me. I deserve respect. Look at Twitter. Look at all my publications. My H index is bigger than your H index. It's
Yeah.
like calm the freak down. So we have huge individual differences in what really we're preoccupied with. But I do think that there's a minimum modicum of a need satisfaction that's required
Yeah.
uh, each of these different levels for us to feel like we can focus our energy and attention, even from a cybernetic perspective. Energy conservation. I mean, we need to, as a whole system, preserve as much energy so we can focus on what really matters to us in our lives, and that's really what I think Maslow was trying to get at there with self-actualization. No idea why flickering is happening, but yeah.
Yeah. Let's go on. So, I mean, so you mentioned individual differences, but are you talking about personality differences, and do you base them on the Big Five, for example, or what are the sorts of psychological aspects that you are referring to there?
When I talk about needs, Or when I talk about individual, what are the most? Are you basically asking me what are the most predictive individual difference variables that predicts satisfaction?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's a very complicated question. That's very because not only it doesn't only come from internal factors, there are also external factors that are important as
Right.
well. Um, Again, this is one of these things with trying to unite the field of psychology. You have all these different you have those who study personality, and then they almost seem to forget that anything matters outside of the self. And then you have those in social psychology that are like, they seem to forget that there's anything inside of us. And then all over the place. Nobody's talking to each other. So yeah, it's all about the interactions. I think there's a lot of factors that help explain that. I mean, for instance, no matter who we are, our personality structure, there are environmental conditions that can give us a great sense of food and security, right?
Yeah.
I think no one can deny that. It's not like your big five openness to experience predicts whether or not you have food on your table, that they give money for food, right?
Yeah.
Or predicts it directly, maybe indirectly, but that's a whole other story. But anyway, yeah. So that's it's very important to recognize that there are a lot of factors. When we look at each of the needs, though, I think that there could be certain linkages. So I think there is a way in which a level in which your question could be answered. I almost said your answer could be questioned, but so there are multiple ways. So for instance, we can go down the line if you want. So I think
Yeah.
the need for security, neuroticism, would do a big job predicting that. Need for connection, you have agreeableness, a big one, predicting that. Need for esteem tends to be maybe a certain facet of extroversion blend with conscientiousness. The grit kind of conscientiousness. People who are really gritty have a need for achievement. They love that. And by the way, I see the world in individual differences because I can't help it because I'm an individual differences researcher, and you see how everyone, including myself, I'm not above any of this. We're all just walking stereotypes of ourselves.
Yeah, sure.
Have you ever noticed that? So
Yeah, I think now and then, I mean, after you read a lot of personality psychology, you start using
yeah.
that kind of framework, but then you go back to reality, and it's a little bit different, right?
Tell me more. Tell me more about that. How it's different
Oh,
in reality.
yeah, I mean, I guess that you read about personality psychology and the big five and the hexaco and so on, and then you start putting people into the five or six different boxes in
Oh
different
yeah.
ways, right? But
Yeah,
then,
I would
but
absolutely.
yeah, but then you get to know, or at least to go back to what you already knew, that it is much more complicated than that, right?
Absolutely, and I certainly don't want to be hypocritical. And I already made the point that we need to have a broader view, and I don't mean to say, but I'm saying, when you look at large-scale correlations, it's so interesting because you find that like people who score very high in grit questionnaires also tend to be people. These sort of clusters of
Yeah.
of correlations, are very interested in achievement, need for achievement. So that would be that. But also a big predictor of the esteem needs is narcissism as well, particularly grandiose narcissism.
Yeah.
So that's a topic I've studied. But then you look at need for exploration, openness to experience predicts that very well, especially particularly cognitive exploration. Extroversion predicts behavioral exploration, which is another form of exploration. Uh, Transcendence, you probably see openness to experience a lot in terms of that, and in terms of the awe, searching for awe and getting chills. That's part of the openness to experience to mean. So you can see a linkage with personality, but I think it's a dynamic system. So lots of different environmental and personality variables combine for sure. And the intellect, Daryl, we talk about intellect, but that is part of the story as well in predicting some of these things. Cognitive complexity and intellectual curiosity is a factor, an individual difference variable that I've been really interested in regards to like the gifted community of students and things like that.
So you mentioned narcissism, and that's related to the dark triad, right, of personality. The other
That's
two,
right.
the other two traits are Machiavellianism, and the other one, please remind me because it's not coming to my mind now.
Psychopathy. Oh, no problem. Psychopathy.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned narcissism. Is it the case
Don't
that
leave out the psychopaths. The psychopaths don't like to be excluded from the conversation.
they certainly
Or
don't?
maybe that's the narcissists. Maybe that's the narcissists who don't like to be excluded from the maybe psychopaths are like, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, probably it's the narcissists, I guess.
Yeah, yeah,
I guess that they need more attention, right?
yeah. Psychopaths tend to be more like covert.
Yeah, and even if they don't have attention, they try to manipulate you in some
Yeah.
ways to favor themselves. So, and anyway, do the other two traits, psychopathy and Machiavellianism, have something to do with these needs from the hierarchy of needs, or not?
Yeah, very much so. I talk about
Yeah.
that. I talk about it a little bit in the book. Some evolutionary psychologists like P.K. Joneson and others have argued that the dark triad characteristics evolved as a very smart strategy for extracting resources in a resource limited environment. When you live in a harsh and unpredictable environment, it is a smart strategy to have developed some of those skills. Sorry, what were we going to ask?
No, no, no. I was just thinking also about the light triad, and I mean, is it the case that for us to be able to fulfill some of the needs, particularly the higher ones, that the traits that go associated with the light triad help us reach that in an easier way, or not?
I think so, yeah. My colleagues and I have been studying the light triad, which involves humanism, faith in humanity, and Kantianism, which is treating people as an end in themselves, not as a means to an end. You do see that harnessing some of those characteristics is positively predictive of self-actualization and really becoming all that we're capable of becoming. You know, a lot about what it means to become a fully human being is not erecting so many defenses. You know, I, you know, so many people hold on to their ego, hold on to themselves with such like they're defending a fort, you know, and it really limits their possibilities for growth, and it really limits the connections that they can make with others. Some of the connections could be really beautiful, and I think that a lot of dark triad people, I mean, would it be a weird thing to say? Like, I think that there's so much there's positive potential in so many of those individuals. They're human too. The thing is, I'm a humanistic psychologist. I can't help it. People are human. I can talk to anyone. Like, there are people who, you know, whatever, Trump supporters come to me. I'm like, let's talk. You know, like whatever. I don't care. Like, I want to know what you're like as a human being. You know what I mean? And I think that sometimes when I see people who are so obviously like psychopathic and narcissistic and Machiavellian, I actually feel compassion for some of them, as long as they're not killing me or anyone else for that matter. But I want to talk to them and say, look, you know, you're so preoccupied with the scheming and all this. Try giving it a break. Like, meditate for like 20 minutes where you give yourself 20 minutes for the first time in your life where you're not scheming about something, and see how it feels. Do you know what I mean? Like, you might be a better person, and the world would be better as a result of you being a better person. So,
yeah, I understand. And what about other individual differences? There are also individual differences that you talk about in the book, like different attachment styles, right? So, what are the different attachment styles that we have, and in what ways do they connect with some of the needs?
Well, you have really two major dimensions of individual differences there. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people treat attachment styles as types,
Yeah.
and you're in this you're securely attached, you're anxiously, you're avoidant, you're then avoidant could have different off branches. But a type way of thinking in psychology is a bankrupt concept. There,
Mm-hmm.
I said it, said it. Um, it's the same. In the DSM, it's bankrupt. You know,
Mm-hmm.
our diagnostic classification of mental illnesses needs to be put in a continuum.
Yeah.
And I think the same is happening in other areas of psychology, including attachment theory. Chris Fraley and his colleagues have done great work showing that the two major dimensions of attachment that we're all somewhere on the continuum is anxious and avoidant, but there's no such thing as secure attachment. So secure attachment, because no one's perfectly securely attached. We're securely attached to the extent to which we can have uh, be less avoidant and be less anxious and preoccupied about whether or not someone's going to be there for us in times of need. But interesting enough, from an individual difference perspective, the anxious continuum tends to be more predictive of maladaptive outcomes than the avoidant one. There tends to be, this is something, an area of research I want to dive into more, I've decided.
Yeah.
There are those who aren't anxious attachment, or are very low in anxious attachment, very high in avoidant, and are very and report very high levels of life satisfaction. You know, there's some people who there's some people that are just happy being single too. Like there's some people that are just like, I don't like, people annoy the beep out of me. You know, like
Yeah. I see your point. So, but you mentioned there that there are some people out there that like to be single, for example. And another thing that you talk about in your book at a certain point is loneliness and the effects, the negative effects of loneliness. So even those extreme cases where people really are so introverted, let's say, that they can basically avoid almost any type of human connection or human contact and they still feel good about themselves. Is it really the case that there's people out there that don't need human connection at all for them to function properly, let's say?
no, well, well, that's why I do argue the need for connection is an important human need, for
Yeah.
sure. There is, you know, when you look at these needs, I argue it as the need to have a minimal number of mutually, you know, mutual relatedness.
Uh-huh.
See, I distinguish that from need for belonging.
Mm-hmm.
Need for belonging and need for intimacy both make up the need for connection.
Yeah.
But if you just have need for belonging, you maybe still be deeply unsatisfied without need for intimacy. But I think for 99.98% of human population, I think it is a basic human need. I think that Roy Baumeister and colleagues have written about this and how there's so much evidence suggesting it's a basic human need. But a minimal, at least a minimal number, is how I define is how they define it as well in their paper, the need to belong. But I would say that you have very, very extreme exceptions, though. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like serial killers tend to not have such a high need for belonging and intimacy, but they're also very, very rare in the human population. So, yeah, I'm talking about, you know, for most of humanity, very important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and another area within the domain of individual differences is intelligence and IQ. Is it the case that there's some correlation between higher intelligence and and the ability to fulfill some of these needs, or not?
Well, in the need for exploration chapter, I have a section on intellect.
Mm-hmm.
Cognitive exploration is a very fascinating area of research that I've been conducting with my colleague Colin DeYoung, who's been on your show, who says he loves being on your show, and others. The need for cognitive exploration does seem to be predicted by IQ as well as intellectual curiosity. Items on the big five, like I really like complex ideas. I really enjoy discussions that get me thinking critically, things of that nature. However, I would turn the question back on you for just a moment and ask you how you define intelligence. A lot of people, when they ask me that question, they use that as a shorthand for IQ. They think the IQ test is all there is to intelligence, or maybe not all there is to intelligence, but that's what they mean by intelligence. Yeah. So I always like to define terms.
So intelligence, do you think that it's more than just the IQ score, and probably we also have to put it into some sort of context? Is that it?
Well, at one level, I think that there is a construct, the human intellect. I think that intellect is an umbrella in a hierarchy itself that includes both ability and engagement factors. So I've taken the view that intelligence, or the human intellect, comprises not just ability factors, but also motivational, intellectual engagement factors that are still lie within the intellectual domain. I'm certainly not trying to pull a multiple intelligences theory so much that it becomes unrecognizable as the word intelligence anymore. But so that's just what I mean. I like discussing that. But I think that, yeah, for sure, it's predictive of need satisfaction, particularly within the domain of creativity and human ingenuity. Moving the world forward. I did some research with. Well, I mentioned Colin DeYoung earlier, but also, I don't know, have you heard of Jordan Peterson?
Yeah, I've heard of him. I guess that nowadays almost everyone has heard of him.
Was he on your show?
No, not yet, at least. Yeah.
Well, so Colin DeYoung was a grad student of Jordan Peterson's.
Jordan Peterson was one of his advisors, right?
Correct. Mean graduate advisor. Yeah. And when I was in grad school, I worked a lot with Colin, and Colin brought in Jordan to this project we worked on, showing that intellectual curiosity was a better predictor of scientific creative achievement than IQ. Really, that was planting some seeds in my theory of intelligence and how we need to incorporate both ability and engagement factors in our understanding of intelligence. And interestingly enough, we found that IQ, or intellectual curiosity, was not very predictive of our artistic creative achievement. So I think we have to be very careful in our field not to bias certain forms of domains of human achievement above others and put some on a pedestal of intellect.
Yeah.
Because I think there's different kinds of characteristics that come into play with artistic, and I don't think that it's fair to do a ranking, and I've seen the rankings. Some people rank different domains and how dumb you are in that field. And I think that's, well, first of all, it's a non-compassionate approach, but it's also just not scientifically really productive. I wouldn't say it's scientifically productive, because we can think of different forms of intelligence. Like, for instance, I've studied intuitive implicit learning in my dissertation that I found was more predictive of artistic than predictive of openness to experience more than intellect. And that's our ability to learn the probabilistic rule structure of the world automatically. And I found there was a very low correlation between that and IQ scores. So I think that was an important part of intelligence, that an individual differences part that had been understudied. So I think that once we open ourselves up to this stuff, so that's a very long-winded way of saying that I do think that cognition and individual differences in cognibility do play quite a role in our self-actualization and creativity. But I like to look at it more nuanced than just IQ as part of cognitive ability. I also actually include imagination as part of the realm of cognitive ability or divergent thinking.
Yeah, and another thing here, I mean, within the topic of human needs and transcendence and things like that, has to do with how we set life goals and if we are able to achieve them or not, because that also has to do with life satisfaction, I guess. And when we talk about that, people mention a lot things like IQ and high conscientiousness and high agreeableness and things like that. So is there any set of basic psychological traits that usually go associated with achieving life goals?
Oh, I mean, yes. I'm an individual differences researcher. If the answer was no, I'd be out of business.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, sure, but it was just basically to try to have you listing some of the most important traits, I guess.
Regardless of the goal, because there's differences depending on what the goal is. If your
Yeah,
goal
yeah,
is
yeah. I mean, when you mention goals, probably you're thinking more about your career goals and your intimate relationships and things like this. At least many of those things in the intelligence/IQ literature, there are many of them that go associated with high IQ and things like that, right?
well, I started off my career first 10 years studying IQ almost exclusively. Really interested in that variable, um, and and cognitive complexity does predict uh, motivation for certain fields, and does predict uh, when you're in certain fields. But it's not a perfect correlation, and a lot of these, no one would say it's a perfect correlation, but some of the correlations can be quite high. A lot of it, I just want to say that a lot of it comes down to our societal structures. So a lot of people don't realize this, but school is set up essentially so that it ranks people on G on general intelligence. And people, this is like a point that like I agree with Charles Murray about. I read an article he wrote once where I was expecting to hate the paper just based on the title and people telling me I should hate him, and then I read this paper, this essay he wrote, and he made it.
What was
Yeah.
the title then?
Oh gosh, I really am I'm blanking on it right now. What it was, but the argument, I can try to find it. But the argument is an argument, the similar argument I've tried to make, but maybe we have different. Me and him may differ on the implications or the societal public policy. But it's true that, and we should be very honest about this discussion, is that the standardized tests are so highly G-loaded, make such strong demands on people who are good at working memory and people who have a high executive attention functioning. And it leaves out a lot of people who may be able to show their intelligence in other ways, that we have to be very careful we're not confounding. When we look at outcomes in life, we have to also recognize that education is a filtering mechanism, right? So, I mean, really exclusive graduate schools look for students with higher GRE scores. They look for, and they say, look, all of our people in our program have above a certain. They didn't do the experiment where they let in all the low GRE scorers and see what they're capable of by bringing other characteristics to the table, right? They're like, well, we need standards, so we need certain threshold. But I mean, I've published a paper showing the correlation between general intelligence. If you take the common variance across lots and lots of different IQ test batteries, and then in a structural equation model, you look at a latent variable model correlation between G and academic achievement G. I wanted to know what's the correlation between standardized academic achievement G and cognitive G.
Yeah.
And we looked starting age 3, and we looked at and even really young, you found the correlation is strikingly high. I mean, not unity, but we're talking like point 0.8. I think we found one at one age group. We found a correlation of point 0.8 between the two G's.
Yeah.
That has deep implications, this finding, if we had honest discussion about that in our society. And I want us to have an honest discussion because ultimately I have the drive to help as many people self-actualize as possible. I can tell when I'm having a good faith conversation with someone about this topic and when I'm not. Some people are interested in this topic from a purely antagonistic point of view. It doesn't sit well with me. There are some people that want to almost be like, oh, see, your finding shows that intelligence is all that matters and that we need to have eugenics and kill all the dumb people or something. At the most extreme, extreme. And this is not the spirit upon which I'm bringing this research to the table, because I want to show that there is variation in this variable. We've set up our societal structures in a lot of ways that's limiting the self-actualization of a lot of people. I think a lot of people are capable of a lot more realization of their potential and contribution to society than we give them credit for, because we focus so much on working memory and standardized achievement test scores and things that are basically making demands on IQ-related cognitive functions that might be leaving out other functions like creativity, imagination, a lot of other things. So it's an argument I think is really not as fully discussed, honestly.
Yeah. And so, I mean, perhaps one thing that is also related to life goals, or how people set up their life goals and things like that, has to do with purpose. So when we talk about purpose in this context, and particularly in the context of scientific psychology, let's say, what do you mean by that? What are purposes, and are there different types of purposes or not?
Well, the purpose is a very daunting word in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
When we think of what is my purpose, we think, oh my gosh, like there's one thing that we're supposed to do, that we're on this earth to do, and I don't really view it in such dramatic terms. I think that it's important for us to have priorities of meaning in our lives. It's important for us to have certain things in our lives, certain goals that we say, well, this is higher priority in our goal list, and it's at a higher level of abstraction in our goal hierarchy. So we have some goals that are very concrete, like get out of bed in the morning, eat breakfast, brush my teeth. We can have very abstract goals, which are our future dreams and aspirations and ideal selves. And if we're constantly striving towards an ideal self, and our ideal self can change, I think we can view purpose as a dynamic process throughout our lives. And we also can view it as, a calling as well. I think that, so Viktor Frankl, the humanistic psychotherapist, I really liked how he talked about, calling is answering questions from outside of ourselves. Yeah. I always really liked that. This is something that it doesn't have to be a one purpose of the thing you're uniquely suited for and only you in the whole world. In fact, Maslow kind of did see it as that way, as self-actualization and purpose is finding a thing that's like a lock and a key that's such a perfect fit. Mm-hmm. I think that there's good enough fits of things that where meaning grows over time.
Yeah.
And meaning can grow from engagement in something and mastery of something. I think many of us can think of an experience where we didn't initially start out liking or loving something, but once we started to get good at it, once we started to really get intimately familiar with it, we started to even feel more of a calling to it. And I take more of that approach to it.
Yeah. So basically, it's not that we have a predefined purpose in any way, but we may achieve life satisfaction through different routes, right?
I think it's very true. I think that I'm not a person who I'm not the here's the 5 steps to living the good life kind of guy. Like I think that we need to find out what, and I say that in my book, we need to find out what the good life means to us.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in responsibility, dare I say. It's a dirty word. Dirty word, responsibility. And what I mean by that is that responsibility for our existence, for the choices we make, the sides of ourselves we don't like, as well as the good sides that we do like, and taking responsibility for how we want to steer our lives and what we're comfortable calling a good life.
Mm-hmm.
Who am I to tell someone else that to look down on them, that what brings them fulfillment, and as long as it's not, I do look down on serial killers, for instance. Like I do look down on some people, but you'd be surprised just how many people I wouldn't look down on. Like that I'm supposed to look down on or something. I think that I'm fascinated by it. I've got lots of friends that do the craziest things in their careers. I have all sorts of friends. Some things I can't mention on this show in polite company. That they're really cool people and they're really caring people, but they do things that other people may be like, why would you do that with your life? And I don't think that any of us are in a position to say, why would you do that with do what you want to do with your life. Mm-hmm. And do it in such a way that you feel like you're living a full existence. And that's good enough. You don't have to answer to anyone.
Mm-hmm. Right. So let me just ask you one last question. Earlier, and you also mentioned this in the book, you mentioned or you referred to humanity's potential or even the potential of individual people. So what does that mean exactly? What are the kinds of things that you think we could achieve if we were more aware of these types of things that we've been talking about during this episode, and probably if we were to set up our life in a way that would be more aligned with fulfilling these types of needs, something like
I see. It's a great question. It's a really great question. I like to make sure I precisely understand a person's point before I even begin to answer it. And I think that your question is very good, a very good one. It's one that we should be discussing as a species. How can we, as a species, consciously direct the species, not just our own lives, but in a way that is more growth forward, more self-actualizing of all the inhabitants on our planet. I do try to get to that in my book. I have a section, What Humans Could Be, which I reposted at my column at Scientific American if people want to read that. Yeah. We, as humans, are capable of much more than the muck we see on Twitter every day. We we are capable of more, and I think that the more we can reduce our fear and anxiety of the unknown, our insecurities about whether or not we belong, or whether or not we have pride and respect from others. Those things take prominence from an evolutionary perspective. It makes sense they would take prominence, but we can focus on our better angels, so to speak, our more transcendent values. We can focus more on, Maslow called it becoming a transcender, are people who are motivated by the B values of life, the values of pure being, truth, goodness, beauty, meaningfulness, justice, perfection. There are some very interesting B values that get us outside of ourselves and peak experiences and transcendent experiences in our lives, like awe and wonder and gratitude and loving kindness. Yeah. If we can cultivate all those things, we will enhance the human species, undoubtedly. But so much of it is about attention and focus. I've done this. I don't know if you've ever done this. You can just get caught in a trap sometimes where suddenly find yourself, you spend a whole day engaged with someone on Twitter, arguing with someone who has one follower or something, who's calling you all sorts of names, and then you spend your whole day on that, and you're like, why did I just do that? Like like I could have spent that day talking to my mother, and telling her how much I love her. Do you know what I mean? It's so much of it is just constantly trying to be as mindful as possible of how we're spending our time and consciousness.
Yeah, I get it. So, Dr. Kaufman, let's end probably our conversation on that positive note with some dark aspects to it, let's say. Right? Anyway, apart from your book, Transcend, the New Science of Self-Actualization, would you like to mention some places on the internet where people can find your work?
Sure. Thanks for asking. You can go to scottbarrykaufman.com, where I have tests you can take. I have self-actualization tests. I have my research papers if you're interested in that. I have other things. Please buy a copy of my book, Transcend. That would be great. I have the psychology podcast. My voice just cracked. I have the psychology podcast. And I'm trying to up my Instagram game. So if you're on Instagram and you're tired of yoga pictures, although one can never get tired of yoga pictures, but if you want something else in your life, go to at Scott Barry Kaufman on Instagram. I try to post things that can uplift us as a species. Maslow said, we can go back towards fear or we can move forward towards growth. We have to keep choosing growth over and over again. And I think that we can do it, and it's a matter of a conscious choice. And I wish all the listeners here today and viewers best of luck in getting through these tough times.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So, guys, again, the book is Transcend, the New Science of Self-Actualization. It's a great book, so really buy it and read it. And I will also be leaving links to your work in the description box of the interview, Dr. Kaufman, so that people can go and check it out. And again, thank you for taking the time to come on the show, and it was great talking to you.
It was my pleasure. It was great talking to you too. Thanks for allowing me to be me.
Hello everybody, thank you for watching this interview until the end and for coming to my channel. As you might have noticed, I've started this channel in February 2018 and I've been putting out regular interviews with academics and intellectuals from a variety of fields, top academics and intellectuals, as you can see on the channel. And I've been having an ongoing fundraising campaign, and you can also support me regularly via PayPal or Patreon. All of the links are in the description box of the interview. And also, if you want to give me a one-time or several times big donations, all of the links you can find there. But please, if you can, support the channel, because it's really important for me to be able to keep it sustainable and to keep it running. So otherwise, and if you like what I'm doing, please share it, leave a like and hit the subscription button. I would also like to give a huge thank you to my patrons and supporters, the main ones: Karen Litska, Anne Blanchett, Paroga Larson, Lagurero, Francis Ford, Hans Frederick Sunda, Jana Henninen, Ricardo Vladimiro, Craig Healy, Adam Kessel, Olaf Alex, Jonathan Wiesel, David Diaz, Anian Katter, Jacob Klinkby, Matthew Whittingbird, Arno Wolf, Tim Hollesy, Enric Alenius, John Connors, Paulina Barron, Philip Force Connolly, Jerry Mueller, Herbert Gintis, Rutger Vos, Bo Weingard, Rebecca Newberger Goldstein, Dan Demetrio, Robert Windiger, Rui Inácio, Arthur Coe, Zoop, Marco Neves, Max Bailby, Colin Holbrook, Susan Pinker, Thomas Trumbull, Bernardo Seixas, Simon Columbus, Jorge Espinha, Phil Kavanagh, Corey Clark, Mark Blythe, Roberto Inguanzo, Mikkel Stormir, Eric Neumann, Samuel Andreev, Tiago Nunes, Bernard Hugney, Alexander Dunbauer, Omari Hickson, Felicia Stevens, Fergal Kusen, Yevon Bodrenko, Hal Herzog, Nuno Machado, Don Ross, my producers, Isar Weber, Rosie, Jim Frank, Lucas Stafiniak, Dr. Ian Gilligan, Sergio Codreanu, Luís Caetano, and Matthew Lavender, and my executive producer, Michel Rugieski. Thank you for all.